Good evening and welcome to the Standing Resolution, the show where big ideas get the cross-examination they deserve. Tonight we're asking a question that sailors, poets, and a fair number of people who have never left dry land have wrestled with for centuries. Is the ocean a place of liberation, or is it something closer to a very large, very wet trap? The answer matters because how we romanticize or reckon with a life at sea says something about what we actually mean when we use the word freedom. Tonight's resolution, stated in full, a life at sea is true freedom, not a kind of bondage. Two debaters will argue this from opposite shores, if you'll forgive the expression. One will stand in favor of the resolution, making the case that a life at sea represents genuine, meaningful freedom in ways that life on land simply cannot match. The other will stand against it, arguing that the sea, for all its romance, is something closer to a master than a liberator. Now, a word worth keeping in mind as we go: neither debater chose their position. Each was assigned their side. So what you're about to hear is the best possible case for each argument, built by people who may or may not.
Let me tell you what freedom smells like. It smells like salt and open water, like a wind that answers to no king, no jarl, no law carved in stone by men who never dared leave the shore. I have stood at the prow of a longship when the land has dropped below the horizon, and there is nothing in any direction but grey water and grey sky, and the guards watching from above. In that moment, you are answerable to nothing made by human hands. No lord can summon you. No boundary can hold you. No fence post, no field, no thrall ring around your neck. The sea cuts every chain that land ties to a man. Now I hear the argument already forming in some cautious mind. The sea has its own demands, they will say, its own cruelty. And I will not lie to you, because a liar earns no seat in any hall worth sitting in. The sea is hard. She will test you past the point where lesser men break. But here is what those cautious minds confuse. They mistake hardship for bondage. They are not the same thing. A man who runs from difficulty is not free. He is simply a slave who has chosen a more comfortable cell. The sailor who masters the windroad, who reads the stars and the color of the waves and the mood of tea.
Well now, my friend from the north speaks beautifully about freedom, and I respect a man who's faced the deep water. But I notice he was standing at the prow. I wonder how freely he'd have spoken if he'd been chained to an oar below it. Here's what I know, and I know it from the deck up. A life at sea doesn't free you from masters. It just trades you one for another, and the new master is far less forgiving than any landlord. You think you've left the king's law behind. The moment you step aboard, the ship itself becomes your sovereign. The wind decides when you sail. The tide decides when you leave. The storm doesn't negotiate. You cannot petition the sea, you cannot bribe it, you cannot vote it down. Now on my ship, every man signs the articles. Every man takes his fair share of the account. Every man gets a voice. I'm proud of that. But even on the most democratic vessel that ever flew a black flag, the ocean itself was never part of the agreement. She never signed a thing, and she can maroon every last one of you on the bottom without a moment's hesitation. Consider what a sailor's life actually demands. You are confined to a hull smaller than most men's houses. You sleep in.
Both sides have made their opening case, and I'll be honest, neither one is going quietly. When we come back, Jarl Havard and Captain Rune get to hear exactly what the other just said, and then answer for it. If you thought the opening was lively, wait until someone has to defend their argument to someone who spent their life proving it wrong. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm Justice Vale, and this is the Standing Resolution, where tonight we're putting the sea itself on trial with the resolution: a life at sea is true freedom, not a kind of bondage. Both sides have staked their ground. Now let's see if either one can hold it. Rebuttals, you have the floor.
Captain Rune is a sharp man, and I will not pretend otherwise. But he has made a clever mistake, and I want you to see it clearly before it settles into your thinking as truth. He says the wind decides when you sail. The tide decides when you leave. And yes, that is so. But what does the farmer do? The frost decides when he plants. The rain decides if he harvests. The Lord decides how much of that harvest he keeps. At least the sailor's master, the sea herself, plays no favorites and keeps no court. She does not demand taxes. She does not conscript your sons. She is hard, but she is honest in her hardness. And this business about the confined hull, the salt meat, the rotations of sleep, I have slept in worse. Every thrall in every longhouse, in every cold corner of the world sleeps in worse, and they do not even have the horizon for company. Discomfort is not chains. A hard bed is not a cage. Now Roon speaks of his democratic ship with pride, and well he should. But notice what he is actually describing. Men who chose their articles, men who negotiated their terms, men who looked at the open water and said, yes, on these conditions I go. That is not bondage. That is a free man's.
Jarl Havard is a fine speaker, and I'll grant him the farmer comparison because it's not wrong. Land has its own tyrannies, no argument there, but notice what he just did. He defended the sea by pointing at how bad everything else is. That's not a case for freedom. That's a case for choosing your chains more carefully. He says the sailor's bargain is freely made. Sign the articles, take your share, go willingly, and on a well-run ship, yes, that's true enough. But freely entering a situation and being free within it are two very different things. A man can walk into a burning building of his own free will. That doesn't make the fire his friend. Once you're 3 weeks out with no land in sight, how free is that choice anymore? You cannot walk away from a bad captain the way a farmhand can walk away from a bad lord. You cannot simply decide the terms no longer suit you and stroll home for supper. The ocean enforces the contract in ways no landlord ever could because the ocean doesn't need enforcers. Distance does the work. And this talk of facing life, standing upright rather than kneeling in someone's hall, I love the poetry of it, I truly do. But a man drowning in open water is.
Jarl Havard, you've drawn a sharp line between hardship and bondage, and I think most people in this room follow the logic. But here's where I want to press you. You said the sailor carries his freedom in his own hands, his own skill, his own courage. So what happens to the sailor who lacks those things? Is the sea only free for the already capable and something closer to a death sentence for everyone else?
That is a fair blade to put against my throat, and I will not dodge it. Yes, the sea is harder on the unskilled. She is unforgiving of the unprepared. But ask yourself what this proves. Does the fact that a poor swordsman dies in battle mean that war offers no glory? Does the fact that a weak man cannot lift the hammer mean that strength is not worth having? Freedom has never been a gift handed equally to all men regardless of their readiness. It is earned. It is grown into. Every sailor who masters the wind road began as a green boy who knew nothing and learned fast or suffered for it. That learning, that forging, is itself part of what makes the life meaningful. A freedom that costs nothing and demands nothing is just another word for comfort. And comfort, I can tell you, never made a single saga worth singing.
Captain Roon, you've argued that once a sailor is 3 weeks out with no land in sight, the original choice no longer counts as free because he can't walk away. But by that logic, a monk who takes vows, a soldier who enlists, a surgeon mid-operation, none of them are free either. Aren't you defining freedom as the permanent ability to exit any situation at any moment, and isn't that a standard that rules out nearly every meaningful human commitment?
Now that is a sharp question and it deserves a straight answer. You're right that I've set a high bar and I'll lower it honestly. No, I don't mean freedom requires the ability to walk out of any commitment at any moment. A monk takes vows freely and I respect that. But here's the difference. The monk's cell is the same size on day 1 as it is on day 1,000. The sea grows larger, not smaller, the further out you go. The commitment doesn't just bind you forward in time, it physically surrounds you on all sides. And the consequences of the bargain going wrong aren't a hard conversation with an abbot. They're the bottom of the ocean. When the cost of a commitment becoming unbearable is death, that's not a vow. That's a trap with a very pretty door. I'm not against commitment. I'm against calling a trap by freedom's name.
That exchange just raised the stakes considerably, and we're not done yet. When we come back, something that makes this show unlike anything else on television, each debater has to stand up and make the strongest possible case for the side they've been fighting against all night. That's not a typo. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Standing Resolution. I'm Justice Vale, and tonight we've been asking whether a life at sea is true freedom or a kind of bondage. We've heard the best shots from both sides. Now comes the part that separates the debaters from the advocates. The Steelman round. Each side argues the other's case. Let's see how well they've been listening.
Here is the strongest thing my opponent has said, and I want you to hear me say it plainly, because it deserves that. The sea does not negotiate. She cannot be appealed to, reasoned with, or outlasted by sheer will. Every sailor who has ever lived has ultimately sailed on her terms, not his own. And when the terms become unbearable, when the storm rises or the hull cracks or the captain turns cruel 3 weeks from any shore, there is nowhere to go. The water surrounds you completely. That is not a metaphor. That is a physical fact. Distance enforces obedience in ways that no landlord, no king, no prison wall ever could, because a prison wall at least stays in one place. The sea moves with you. She is always there. And she does not care how brave you are, or how skilled, or how loudly your saga will be sung. She has swallowed braver men than you and made no account of it. That is the true case against the resolution, and I will not pretend it has no weight. It has considerable weight. It kept me honest all evening. And yet, here is why I still hold my ground. The thing Captain Roon describes, that total, indifferent, ungovernable power, is not the sea's cruelty toward you specif.
Here is the most powerful thing Jarl Havard has said tonight, and I'll do it justice because he's earned that much. On land, freedom is always rationed by someone else. The Lord holds the deed. The king holds the law. The priest holds the afterlife over your head like a debt you'll never finish paying. Every boundary you cross on land, someone drew it and someone will come to collect if you cross it wrong. The sailor, the real sailor who knows his trade and reads his stars, he carries his sovereignty inside him. His skill is his passport. His knowledge is his title. No man can deed that away from him or tax it or inherit it when he dies. He takes it with him wherever the wind goes. And the wind, as my opponent rightly said, goes everywhere. That is a genuine and serious argument for freedom, and I have sat with it all evening, and I respect it. But here is where it breaks down for me. All that internal sovereignty, that hard-won skill and irreducible self-command, you can have every last drop of it and still drown. The sea doesn't recognize your credentials. She doesn't care that you've earned your freedom fair and square. The most skilled captain I ever knew went down in ASQ.
Both debaters just argued the other side and did it well enough that I'm starting to wonder if either one is entirely sure they're wrong. Closing arguments are next, and that's where the whole evening either holds together or comes apart. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. I'm Justice Vale, and this is the standing resolution. We've heard both sides argue their own case and each other's. Now comes the moment that counts. Closing arguments are next, and after everything said tonight, I suspect both debaters know exactly where the knife needs to land.
Here is what this whole evening comes down to. Captain Roon is right that the sea can kill you. I never said otherwise. But he has spent the night confusing mortality with bondage, and they are not the same wound. Every life ends. Every man who ever drew breath was sailing toward his last day from the moment he arrived. The question was never whether death could reach you. The question was whether you lived in a way that was yours. The landlocked man dies too. He dies having asked permission to plant, permission to harvest, permission to travel, permission to speak. He dies having bent his knee to every fence post and deed holder between his cradle and his grave. His chains were quieter than the storm, and he called that safety freedom. The sailor dies, having gone out. Having stood at the prow of something moving under his own hand, toward a horizon no one told him to seek. Having earned his knowledge in the only school that cannot be bought, the open water. The Norns weave every man's thread the same length. The only choice given to any of us is what shape we make of it while it lasts. A man who sailed freely and drowned was freer than a man who lived safely in someone else's.
Jarl Havard is a man I'd have signed onto my articles without a second thought. He speaks well and he means it. But he just told you that a man who drowned freely was freer than a man who lived. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because that is where the romance of the sea arrives at its true destination. When the argument for freedom ends with a drowning man and calls it a victory, Something has gone badly wrong with the argument. I ran a democratic ship. Every man signed the articles. Every man took his equal share. I am prouder of that than anything else I did in my life on the water, but even I know what that life actually cost. The confinement, the hunger, the storms that didn't care about our articles or our democracy or our courage. The shipmates I buried in water, so deep their names never came back up. The sea is the grandest thing I have ever known. I would not trade having sailed her, but grandeur is not freedom. Magnificence is not liberty. And a life spent at the mercy of something that vast, that indifferent, that absolute in its power to take everything from you without warning or appeal, that is not freedom wearing hard clothes. That is bondage weary.
And there it is. Two debaters, one ocean, and an argument that I suspect neither of them has entirely finished having with themselves. Jarl Havard gave us freedom as something forged in hardship, carried inward, proven by the willingness to go out and face what cannot be bargained with. Captain Rune gave us freedom as something that has to survive contact with reality, including the reality that the sea has never once honored a man's credentials before taking him under. Both cases were made with honesty and with genuine force, and I'll be honest with you, there were moments tonight where I wasn't entirely sure which side of the water I was standing on. That's your job now. Jarl Havard, Captain Rune, this was a genuinely fine evening, and I mean that without reservation from either shore. The resolution stands or falls with you, the viewers. Weigh what you heard tonight and cast your vote at Paxelle.tv, where you'll also find our next resolution waiting for you to choose. The debate that comes after this one is entirely in your hands. One thing worth knowing before you go, the debaters you heard tonight are AI personas, and the positions they argued were assigned, not chose.